So thank you for the opportunity to speak on something that I am very passionate about, which is physician flourishing. And the journey towards physician flourishing begins with a situation analysis and a task of determining our current state. So I'm the local expert in my department on burnout because I burned out 4 times in the 5 years that I joined Columbia. And this was a different experience for me at my previous institution. Where I was an attending for many years. We were a much smaller family in a small hospital, and I did not know that physicians got burned out. But medicine is a constrained and stressful environment, and we occupy an influential position as thought leaders and culture shapers of our hospital. And so we should use that position to advance physician flourishing. So I have no disclosures, but I'd like to discuss what we know about burnout and the current data on its prevalence. And secondly, the state of burnout, which is identifying the burned out surgeon. So we all have our own colloquial definition of burnout, but in the literature, the core of burnout is exhaustion and fatigue caused by long-term involvement in situations that are emotionally demanding. It's a psychological syndrome that emerges in response to chronic work stress, and it's measured in 3 domains: emotional exhaustion, depersonalization, and a low sense of personal accomplishment. So the Maslow burnout inventory has become the clinical standard for quantitatively assessing burnout, and is composed of a validated 22-question inventory scored on a 7-point Likert scale. And responses indicate the frequency with which certain feelings are experienced at work, varying from never to every day. And your scores will put you in tiers of high, medium, and low risk of burnout. So the first subscale, emotional exhaustion, assesses the feelings of being emotionally overextended and exhausted by one's work. And the depersonalization subscale measures unfeeling and impersonal responses towards recipients of one's service. Lastly, the personal accomplishment subscale assesses feelings of competence and successful achievement. Lower mean scores on this subscale correspond to high degrees of experienced burnout. So published every year, the MedScale Lifestyle Report indicates that burnout affects all specialties. Over 500,000 physicians a year are burned out at any given time. Critical care is at the top, and surgeons are in the middle at about 43%. And these rates are consistent with other data. A 2009 survey of American surgeons, almost 8,000 of them, indicated that over 40% of responding surgeons were burned out. And in residents, a 2018 survey of American surgery residents reported a high burnout risk in 69% of over 500 respondents. So some would argue that it's the millennials that are affecting the data disproportionately, that the argument is that baby boomers don't actually burn out. And it turns out that this isn't true. Matriculating medical students are better than their age-matched peers, other four-year college graduates. By the second year of medical school, this trend reverses and persists throughout their training process. So the idea that burnout is related to our admission process might be wrong, that people were already primed for depression and burnout is not borne out by this data. Another argument states that burnout is just a sign of the American condition. We are the land built on hard work, aren't we? And so that isn't true either. It turns out that physicians are still more burned out than the general population, and this trend is worsening. From 2011 to 2014, the general population has stayed the same with respect to burnout, and physicians have gotten worse. The orange line is general population, and the blue line is physicians. And satisfaction with work-life balance has also worsened for physicians with respect to the general population. So some would argue that all professionals work too much, and also this isn't true. It turns out that any degree beyond a high school diploma confers a benefit to burnout and lowers your risk, and the more advanced degree one has, the better, except for physicians. The incidence of burnout is the same as lung cancer. So why? Why do doctors get burned out? And it turns out it's basically 2 things. It's our personality and it's our profession. So among sociodemographic factors, young age is consistently related to burnout, as is female sex. And relationship status research shows some mixed results, with some analysis showing no association and others finding that being single and childless confers a higher risk for burnout. And finally, the dimension of neuroticism, which is one of the big 5 higher order personality traits, is most clearly linked to burnout. Neurotic individuals are more likely than average to be moody and to experience feelings of anxiety, worry, anger, frustration, envy, jealousy, guilt, depressed mood, and loneliness. In the 1980s, the role of compulsiveness, which is performing an act persistently and repetitively without it necessarily leading to an actual reward or pleasure, is consistent in the typical physician personality. And it leads to this triad that involves doubt and uncertainty, guilt, and an exaggerated sense of responsibility. Even further, the personality styles and coping mechanisms that are inculcated in medical training may place us at risk for distress, conscientiousness, compliance, or a high sense of responsibility, and compartmentalization, which is distancing ourselves from intense emotional experiences. These are very, very helpful in training, but can prove maladaptive when we are stressed. Physician identity is central to our sense of self. We choose this path at a very young age, at a pivotal point in our adult development, and we often develop other major milestones such as marriage and family in order to pursue this identity. And so work-related factors are quite challenging in a way that they may not be for non-physicians. And the other major factor contributing to burnout relates to the profession itself. These are described in a RAND Corporation report in 2013. The first on the top left is just excessive workload, not only increased work hours, but work intensity. We have emotionally draining situations every day, and when the workload is high, recovery becomes impossible. Another is a loss of collegiality and isolation from other colleagues, and a lack of social support in the workplace is clearly associated with burnout. Added to that, the loss of control and autonomy, especially if you came of age in another era of medicine. Still another is an inefficient work environment or a high hassle factor, and many practitioners will cite the EMR and the cumulative regulatory burden. Work-life integration is another area, and this includes off-hour meeting times, long shifts, weekend shifts, inflexible schedules, etc. And finally, the congruence of personal values with the prevalent values of your organization, and whether the organization is authentic in the fulfillment of their stated values. So the consequences of burnout manifest across multiple domains, including medical errors, turnover, near misses, and not surprisingly, depression and suicide. And I want to give you a quick primer on physician suicide. Every year, 300 to 400 physicians die by suicide. And when psychological autopsy studies are performed, this is what emerges. The most concerning thing is that 90% of victims had a mental illness at play, but less than half were actually diagnosed. The protective factors are, as you imagine, and most importantly, I think, for physicians, is a positive attitude toward treatment. As we dig deeper into why so many suicide victims had untreated mental health issues, we discover that this starts in medical school. Only 1/5 of those who screened positive for depression used mental health services. And in attendings, there's a whole host of unknown consequences to admitting a mental health disorder. This was my New York Presbyterian licensing application as of 4 years ago. And I'm asked to disclose whether I am depressed. And no one knows where this information goes, who sees it, and what the consequences are for me identifying with this. So as we think of ways forward, my theory is that part of the reason we haven't seen more robust results from the burnout literature is the broad cognitive frame of American healthcare, which reinforces a pathogenic approach to health. So we focus on disease and illness, which prompts us to think in terms of risk factors and disease amelioration. The alternative is a salutogenic approach to health, which proposes that the goal should be to focus on the factors that encourage the opposite of burnout. So what is the opposite of burnout? Many have suggested that engagement is the opposite of burnout. And in the business world, this is the latest buzzword, and there's been a flurry of activity surrounding employee engagement, and it's been the billion-dollar question for organizations, is how do we become engaged? How do we encourage and sustain employee engagement? It's become as overused as the term burnout, because we read about falling engagement levels worldwide. So we'll start at the very beginning, which is what is the meaning of employee engagement? And there's little agreement as to what it means, but I will offer that in short, engagement involved a willingness to use extra resources, emotional and physical, to your job. And so how do we actually measure engagement? One of the ways hospital uses to measure employee engagement is the Gallup Q12 survey. And if you read the questions, they're asking about more the conditions in which people work rather than the state of engagement. If you're an academic, the Utrecht work engagement scale is what you use. This is 3 domains that include vigor, dedication, and absorption. It's the only validated survey, and it's 17-question inventory. Vigor is supposed to mean high energy and resilience. Dedication is supposed to mean a sense of significance and enthusiasm. And the last subscale is absorption, which means one is fully concentrated, happily engrossed, and time passes quickly. In other words, this is a state of flow. And the two main themes that run through physician wellness literature are the ability of doctors to have some control over their external work environment and to influence their own happiness through their own personal values and choices. The other key ingredient is physician leadership. And the business world is replete with studies tying leadership to engagement that have nothing to do with the job itself. It's your relationship with your immediate supervisor, the ability of senior leadership to lead the department or division and communicate its goals, and lastly, pride in the organization. Great leaders are able to tap into mission mindedness. Great leaders tell you why first before they tell you how and what. But these stories of engaged physicians doesn't get as much press as the widespread nature of burnout perpetuated by this annual report. And when I read this report, I have confirmation bias and I start getting panicked that literally everybody is burning out. But the Medscape Lifestyle Report does not release their methods and they don't return emails. So it's unclear what scale they're using or how they define burnout. And the reason this is important is that unless we agree on the definition, how can we discuss solutions? I mentioned at the beginning of my remarks that I burned out multiple times. And when I told this to my division chief, he immediately dismissed it and said, "Tess, you aren't burned out." And my initial response was, yes, I was. Yes, I am burned out. But as I reflect on my own journey, this seems to be a very volatile path from burnout to engagement, there and back again. Is that kind of whipsawing even possible? Did I actually have burnout syndrome, or was I just stressed out? I think I did not allow for the 2-year super steep learning curve of being a critical care attending. And no one tells you that it takes a long time beyond training to become competent. So there may be lots of overlapping areas between stress and burnout and depression, and we tend to conflate all work dissatisfaction with burnout. Yes, of course, chronic work stress can lead to burnout, but we need to make sure that we are accurately diagnosing the issues before we attempt interventions. Because I agree that for burnout, organizational solutions are more effective than individual ones. But if the issue is depression and or anxiety, getting treatment is required, not yoga at 10 a.m. And if the issue is excessive stress, the solutions are still yet different. It might just be time and grace. So this is the pressure to change equation. And I think you have to accurately calculate this for yourselves. This is how you change. So D is dissatisfaction with the current state. V is vision, a clear shared vision of the desired state. And P is process, the use of process that removes obstacles blocking access to the desired state. And most people spend most of the time on P, but without D and V, you won't get anywhere. And certainly if any variable is 0, you will never actually change. So as I conclude my remarks on burnout, I want to leave you with a couple thoughts. One is the much vaunted idea of work-life balance needs to be amended or thrown out the window. This concept conjures the image of a scale and a zero-sum game. More of one equals less of the other. And we're encouraged to get out of the hospital so we can finally enjoy life rather than actively seeking joy and fulfillment while at work. Effective work-life integration should highlight the connection between work and life, not competition. And doing this requires us to change the narrative from reaction to agency. In almost 20 years of medicine, I've been through the halls of many, many institutions. And what strikes me the most about the state of burnout and engagement is the degree of learned helplessness or hostile denial I see in many people. And I submit that burnout is contagious. So if all you do is complain, it's contagious. And conversely, engagement is contagious. There can develop a virtuous cycle of engagement. Change is slow, it moves at a snail's pace, but you can start doing something. And if you're burned out, I want to leave you with the idea that we have agency, and not many groups in the world can say that. Agency over our own lives and agency over our work environment. And if you are not burned out, you also have agency because we need to learn from you, share best practices, and use your resilience and emotional intelligence to help others on the journey. Thank you so much for your time.